It's okay. So welcome everybody. Helen Patterson here. I see Mohini, so it's going to be one of those tech days, but that's okay. So I'm Helen Patterson. I'm the founder of Life Works Well, and we are an HR boutique consultancy. We deliver HR with heart and help organizations create healthy, high performance cultures. This month, we've actually been focusing on Black History Month here in Canada. And it is something that we like to do all year long. And so today we're going to have a little bit of a talk just quickly about Black History Month, talk about discrimination, have an open dialogue, look at some reflections. We're going to share some strategies and tips, and then we're going to have a Q&A with Keshelle Davis, and I'll introduce her a little bit later. So before we start, Mohini, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you to move the slides. I'd like to just do our land acknowledgement. And so we here in Canada, across the nation, we often recognize our traditional territory. I'm here in Toronto, Ontario, for those joining me. Let me know where you're calling in from. It'd be great to know. And so the territory that I'm on is Treaty 13, and I want to acknowledge the many nations that came before me, and the land that I'm on, Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, as well as many other First Nations that are diverse. So I want to acknowledge this beautiful land I'm on that I'm sharing today. So moving forward, Mohini, I love starting with a quote, and we're going to be joined by some amazing women today. I think I saw a long list of people. And one of the things that I think about when I think about making the world better, it's keep doing it, right? Keep doing it. And we can all take part in making this a more equitable place. So just a few things, if you want to put in the chat at any time, any reflections, any questions you might have, your thoughts on it. I'm going to ask Keshelle later about what, if anything, they do in the Bahamas around this time. But I thought before we get into our talk, I want to share some stats in Canada. And thank you to Mohini, who does a lot of the research for our organizations. But, you know, when you think about it, so I know Bahamas is only close to 400,000 people. I'm in Toronto alone. There's over 3 million now, so it's quite large. It's diverse. It's becoming more diverse. But you know, we were a colony, and so we're really trying to break colonization and really make it a different world. And you know, 400 years later, we're still trying to do this. And after the pandemic and after the things that were happening in the US and Canada since George Floyd, there's been finally some recognition for looking at equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that's part of the work we do. And it's still happening today that there's large percentages of Black Canadians and other minorities experience discrimination. And so how can we keep working to address this? Like if you look at the stats, it's pretty unbelievable that there's still a large number of human rights complaints in work, in promotion, and advancement. And so what can we do? So we're going to have a little chat about that later. And we're going to just whip through these slides. And I apologize to those just joining or watching this later. I am still have to get my new laptop organized, so I can't. I'm asking Mohini to move forward the slides, but it's really amazing that there was a study that was done a while back where a group actually whitened, what they called whitened. They took someone's resume, Black, and then there was also some other groups, and they actually changed the names to make them Anglo. And it was amazing to me that by changing the name, it changed how they were looking at the resume. And it's just eye-opening, like this is still happening in 2022. It's ridiculous, or in the last few years. So it's really, really unfortunate. I think finally, over the last couple of years, as I said, people are starting to do the work, looking at their own lens, how they've been looking at not only conscious bias, but unconscious. So there's a lot more to do. I can share this. I always share the slides for later. So we weren't going to spend a lot of time, but I really just, it helps open up the dialogue. So if we keep moving on, you know, we're going to touch on this later on in the resources. I'm going to share a few things as well. But I'm so excited today because I met Keshelle Davis at a women's retreat, a mastermind. We were part of an incubator for a year because we left the corporate world, and we were doing work as entrepreneurs. And so there's a lot we're going to talk to about reinvention as well. So she's the CEO of the Training Authority, and we had been chatting at another retreat about how to bring virtual training and other training into organizations and, you know, development. So she's helping now entrepreneurs with business growth. She was doing a lot of corporate work still. Author of You Can Become Wealthy and Manifest Your Dreams. I love also what she does with vision boards and dream board parties. And she does some of that, not only about your life, but about your career goals, whether they're in a corporation or individually as an entrepreneur. I mean, I love that stuff. I should have put my vision boards up here today. So we're going to have an amazing time talking to Keshelle. And before we do that, let's just whip through the last few slides. Sorry, yeah, just say, you can look at these resources later, because I think it's really important, whether you are in an organization or starting your own company and will be hiring employees or bringing others in, it's really, really important to start from an inclusive mindset. So let's just stop the slides. If you want to just whip through them again, you can look at these later. I send these out, or you can go to my website. And we're just going to have a little chat with Keshelle, because there's so much we can talk about. And I didn't share any of that before with you, Keshelle, and I just thought it's an interesting thing, because when I looked up a little bit about Bahamas, I thought, wow, okay, 90% are actually Afro-Bahamian or Black. And so is there still, you know, some discrimination in your country? And I thought, I looked at some human rights, because it seems like, you know, no matter where we are, there's still equity issues for women and for other gender identities. And so every country is at a different place. But I also looked at Christopher Columbus, who discovered, of course, because he's the one that seemed to take over all these lands, and you had a large indigenous population that, you know, would have been like pretty much wiped out. And so it's really saddening when you start to read these things and think about, you know, that history and how you've had to fight and you know, be recognized. And I, you know, I am a white female here in Canada, enjoying so much freedom. And so, but I'm doing my work to open up this discussion and have these real discussions about, you know, humanity, really. So there's going to be a lot here. And if anyone has questions as we go or want to make a comment, it's a pretty informal environment here, and we just love to have the dialogue. So let me ask you, first of all, thank you for joining. And we'll talk a little bit about your career as we have this discussion, but I know you were in corporate first, and then you started your own company. And so I'm just jumping right in. Did you experience discrimination in your career?
Yeah, so there's so many things that you said, even from the introduction, that I can unpack. But before I say, I want to thank all of those who are here. I see Tossie and Linda, my Bahamian sisters, and of course those who will watch the replay. It's also nice to meet you, Monica. And so, yeah, let's dive in. So I've been in the corporate world prior to leaving and starting my own company. And I was in the corporate world, I would say, for about 17 years. And I always stop looking at that. And I'll tell you the discrimination that I personally can relate to is not necessarily of race. It was more of gender.
Mm.
Right? And I could specifically remember, me climbing the corporate ladder, me being a driven female, want what it feels like, or going to the top of whatever career or role or company that I was connected to. That comment of, who is she sleeping with? Right? Because I was usually the youngest female in these roles, in these prominent roles, these high roles. And the fact that I was young, I was a female, the question became, okay, how did you get to the top so fast, or in my youth? And so that was the discrimination that I experienced. If I were to open the conversation or expand the conversation, and you talk about, the Bahamas is predominantly a Black, Afrocentric country. And it does beg the question, do we also experience racism or discrimination, I would particularly say? And I would say yes. And the way that I've seen it play out, as well as discussed, is twofold. One, there is this place of colorism still in the Bahamas, right? So, we all Black, but I am Blacker than you, or you are Blacker than I am, or you are brighter than I am. And that plays a role. In the country, we talk about Conky Joes. So that's a term that that is used quite a lot. And a Conky Joe in the Bahamas is really a white Bahamian, right? And so it's that comment around, okay, who are the Conky Joes? And the Conky Joes are the ones filling, in a lot of cases, the top positions or getting the better opportunities because they are white Bahamians. Those conversations still come up in the country. And then the second way I see it play out is in our two biggest industries, which is in this current time, banking and finance and hospitality. Those are our two industries, or top industries here in the country. You can find that the very, very top positions, the executive level positions, are not filled by Bahamians predominantly. They are still filled by international individuals, right? So the conversation around, Bahamians only, whether male or female, only fill those middle management roles, but not necessarily the C-suite roles. They are reserved for, persons who are out of town. So that's typically the two types of conversation that's very, very common here in the country.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and that's so interesting because so there's still that elite, I would say, group. And, it's even though, and that's why I was wondering, because I know that you are also larger populations of Haitians who have come in. And so that would be a minority group within your country. And so there's still always these groups of people. And thinking about I wanted to just take a pause and think about Ukraine today and what's happening there, and Russia, and these differences of ideologies. And so much of it comes from this like place of hatred versus love, right? And difference. And it's like we should be embracing. So it's such a tough conversation sometimes to have with people. And so this is why here in Canada, there's been a lot of work. But, this should have been something that was, started years ago, where, Caucasians, white are still really the majority. And so it's easier to look at it, but within even a group, within even your country, there's still this discrimination and this, at the top echelons of corporate, that there's the very, there's still the few that get those professions, and to those C-suite levels. So, what I ask you then, what do you think we can do? Like whether it's individuals or people that have organizations or, I have an HR, that's my business. So, we are always trying to fight for this. We're a little exhausted because, sometimes the profession hasn't had a good reputation, but this is a lot of the times the reason we go into it, because we do believe in the fairness and we do want to make a difference. So I know you had a background in corporate for quite a while. And so, was there something you think that would be helpful that companies can do, whether they're small or large, that can help eradicate some of these challenges?
Yeah, I love this question, and there's so many ways that it could be answered, right? Although I am not formally in corporate now, my work with the training authority, I still work with HR managers, CEOs, still work with corporate quite closely. And, the whole and I've also being in training, now external out of corporate, but also when I was in corporate in the training department, which is a part of HR, right? One of the things that from an HR perspective, I always felt could be done is, and it's also that talk that's happening in the HR communities here in the country, is ensuring that the voice of the HR manager, director is heard, that the HR people sit at the table of the core decisions at that C-suite. Unfortunately, I find it really absurd that a lot do not. And for whatever reason, I find that a lot of persons in HR are still not at those top decision-making opportunities to be able to have their voices heard about the fairness, about what's happening around the decisions that need to be made. I speak to a lot of HR people here, and that is the cry. And so one of the things that I've began doing in my role as a training authority is having those hard conversations. And sometimes it's not hard, it's just sometimes it's heart to heart conversations with CEOs, those who I have had the opportunity to get to know through my working relationships or just through friendship. Hey, look, what is happening? Let me hear from your perspective. Why aren't these things being done? And so that's a big part of what I think could be done. Just hearing from the business owner's perspective, the CEO's perspective, the CFO perspective, to see, okay, what could be done? Why isn't it happening? What are you looking for to ensure that we get those voices at the table, and how can we get it done? And so that's something that I'm passionate about. I try to speak to someone in the CEO seat as often as I can. And so that's the first thing. I mean, I can go on, but I'll shut up on.
Oh, no, so here's the thing. So here we are in Black History Month in Canada and the United States. And, it's the first time I'd say that I'm actually seeing a little bit more, whereas, sometimes you'd have one or two posts, but I'm now seeing, and maybe that's social media as well, but I am seeing a lot more people saying, this is not just about right now. And it's not just about being performative and, just putting up some posts. It's like, how are you going to effectively make the change and live it, those actions? And it can't just be so the leadership is so critical, yet often they're not as engaged. And so that's where it's a challenge as well. So I love what you said, because I think we are seeing a little bit more with CHRO role, which is Chief Human Resources Officer role, or people experience, they're calling it. More and more they are starting to get a seat at the table, but it's still a challenge. And it's still a challenge to not just be an employer brand. It's walking the talk, and that is more and more difficult. So the actions, right, are what we need, not the words. And so I love, like, for example, and this might be linked to what you do in the training authority, because there are some mandatory training that we have to do in Ontario, as an example, where I am, and across the country, like on harassment and understanding discrimination. Like when you're hired, you have to do this, and a few other areas. But it's not just a checklist. So I'm agreeing, like, it's not just Black History Month, right? What can we do all year long? How can we do this? So the training, I wanted to ask you this question, and we didn't plan this, because I gave you a couple high levels, but the difference between real, like, understanding and development, and then training. Because I'm very curious, because it's the change, and you do a lot of things in different areas. So it's like, how do we affect that change? Versus training,
Listen, I am so passionate about this topic, Helen. To the point where I was at the point where I'm like, I'm no longer training employees. I'm out of the field. And I in some cases, I still have one foot out of the field already because of that same thing. I can speak from the Bahamian perspective and the companies that I've worked with, and I've worked perhaps with just about every industry across the country, so many organizations in my career. And I think that if you were to ask what is my biggest pet peeve in the training and development industry, is that, and I've written on it, I write for the National Guardian, I've spoken on it on stages. And so, like, as we were talking, I'm like, okay, you're going to open this box, right?
Yeah, but I'm opening it.
I think companies are still, with the exception of those who I've seen make the change, and again, I can speak locally, companies are still checking the box just for training. I have in the topics that I've brought up in HR, I speak regularly at the HR conference. I speak regularly at the BICA, which is the accounting professions. These people who either arrange the training and pay for the training. Those two players, those two groupings, they have admitted to me on several occasions in several different ways, just again through the topics that I would bring up in these forums, that an HR person will say, Keshelle, you are right. My job is really only to get the training done. What happens after the training, that's not what I focus on, right? And these are HR, this is the HR community saying that. And so I'm like, okay, at least now you having the awareness, perhaps whether they did not before, have the awareness that, hey, it can no longer be training done, check. All right, let's go to the next training. And so I think because I brought the conversation up, and this would have been over the last pre-pandemic, so maybe 4 years, I started to really have those conversations. Because being in the industry so long, I'm like, okay, I'm really getting tired of just going into companies, training them, following up, waiting for that next step, that development now that needs to happen, and getting or hearing crickets or saying we'll get back to you, and they never do. So I started to have those conversations. I think now I can count on my hand companies who I've seen being very intentional about the development. And in my experience, being intentional means, training is a day or half a day or a week, whatever, however you arrange it. But there is an intentional follow-up, 30 days later, 60 days later, 90 days later, to check in. And I like to say train and maintain. And that maintain element, again, I'm seeing some companies starting to make the investment, because it's an investment in money and time. And hopefully that continues to move in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's amazing. It is, as despite the tough couple of years it's been, I think it has opened up the doors for so much more. So, we've been hearing a lot about this great resignation.
Yeah.
And, we wanted to talk a little bit about reinventing and things like that as well, because, there is so much development that's a possibility, right?
Yeah.
And the learning, like if we think about when after George Floyd's murder in the US in 2020 in May, it really opened up again this dialogue and conversation for the education and the unlearning, right? Like really, people were very uncomfortable talking about white supremacy, that term. And so, this is where what I've seen over the last couple of years is that it's been moving into beyond training. It's been, let's have open discussions, let's unlearn, let's relearn, let's learn over and really start over in a way. So I sort of find that this, despite it's difficult because it's uncomfortable, people don't like uncomfortable conversations, or here I am. And for me, even I had so much to learn, even though in my view, I have been a champion of human rights for years. And yet I had to dig deeper and say, really, am I doing enough? Could I be doing more? Can I check my own conversation and how I live my life and what I can do? So I think if anything, it's been so tough with the pandemic, with everything else, but it's been, in a way, it can open up possibility. That's what I'm hopeful for. I now have hope. I might not have had it a while ago, but I think, so when I think about the work you're starting to do, and Frank, and first I wanted to just also recognize all these awards you've won. I'm like, this woman who is like, you are a firecracker. You just have so much passion. And so you are a change maker now. You are breaking barriers and, and creating this opportunity. So what do you think about, what do you think about the possibility right now? Because with the pandemic and all of the remote work and change, like a lot of companies start, we already knew, so it's still linked to work, but it can come in different ways. The future of work was going to be a gig economy, which is freelancers or entrepreneurs and everything. So it really, and remote work possibilities and more connection, it really escalated its arrival in a way. So how have you taken that, like being in corporate, then working with corporate, now working with women entrepreneurs?
Yeah.
What do you think is next for people, like reinventing themselves and linking it to everything that's happening in the world? But where do you see some opportunity for reinvention? And I know maybe we all have to go to your like vision board
Yes.
future shop to talk about that.
Yeah, I love vision boards, so that's a passion. I can do that all day. But I love this question too. So first of all, reinvention has to start with the individual. They have to, and the individual being the employee, the female entrepreneur, the female professional, they have to know, reflect, identify what they want for themselves right now. And that's something that I do very, very often. And I think that's why people say, Keshelle, you're always reinventing yourself. You always changing, because I am very deliberate about stopping, thinking, looking at my life and reflecting and asking myself, what do I want right now? But I think Linda said in the comment, it's many people never do that introspection. They are so busy with the day-to-day life. And of course, for many, there are so many things on our plates, but it's critical and it's a disservice if you don't stop and ask yourself, hey, who am I now? Where have I changed? Where have I changed? How have I changed? What's no longer serving me? What do I love right now? All of those questions that that inspire that reinvention. Because if you start to really reflect and ask yourself those questions, and I do it typically on a walk. Like most mornings, I would do a 20 to 45-minute walk. Sometimes it's running, sometimes it's a very slow walk, but I'm in my head and just asking myself, these questions, right? And then it births that reinvention. So it has to start with the individual, because it's having that individual having the autonomy and the agency over their own life. Then of course that speaks to, if they're working in corporate, how are they still satisfied with their experience in corporate? If no, what are you prepared to do about it? If you still love your job, how can you inspire change in the workplace? And so again, it starts with that individual. Companies now, and during the pandemic, I have a very strong tech background. So I am a tech trainer by profession as well. And so one of the first set of speaking opportunities that came during 2020 for me was, Keshelle, can you come and speak to my staff or my audience about remote? Because they know that, I like technology, remote. I've been using that remote term for a while. And so the reinvention also comes from the employee side, the employer side, for them to appreciate, leaders in corporate to appreciate that the world has changed. And it's not going back. Some companies wanted to go back to normal, whatever normal was. And being okay with the change, recognizing that employees can still perform in their capacities at work, but in a totally different way, virtual, remotely. Even some of the hours are not necessary in today's society. 8 hours, 5 days a week, and so it's again, the employee needs to see it, the employer needs to see it. And then there has to be, and again, the pandemic did it and accelerated it, but it has to be that constant message that, hey, you know what, you don't have to go back. I have a sister who works in corporate. She has twins, boy, girl, twins. They're 8 or about to be 8. And she, for the last 2 years, she has been, working from home. She's in IT, so she's doing the work. And now that things are getting back to normal, they are kind of, the company is forcing everyone to get back to the office. And I'm like, why? Why? But it's the employers needing to have that mindset shift, but also the employees recognizing that if this company no longer serves me, am I bold enough, confident enough to step out and do what I feel I need to do for myself, my family, my mental health? Because there is the gig economy. There's really no shortage of opportunity, I believe, in the world today.
Well, yeah, that's amazing. And that's the reality. And I love what you said about like the air quotes, right? Everybody's like, how many times? Because what is normal? Like my version of it might be completely different anyway from someone else's. So, this return to that, I never liked that when that was happening. It's like, because I never liked the normal to begin with. It's like, wait a minute, let's just like status quo was not good. But there's so much in there. And I love what you said though about the introspection and the individual. And part of me wonders if that is really where the future is going. So if we think about the training and development space, which you've been in a lot, and technology as an enabler as well, because newer generations are demanding that if I don't align to this company and what they do, their vision, their mission, and what they do for the world, my community, and then for the world, if they don't have any, care about the environment or have some corporate social responsibility, I'm not going to stick around versus other generations that may have been loyal and, stayed forever. Yeah. So these employers have to reinvent as well. They have to look at saying, you know what, we managed through this couple of years. So why are we trying to force people back when they have to then commute, maybe 2 hours a day? They've got to worry about picking up their kids at daycare, and then they've got to get them to, when the world opens up, the hockey and soccer and everything else, right? So it wasn't working. And so why go back? So I find that interesting. But, for me, what I read recently, someone was talking about, like what the topics are right now. And a lot of it is this even the Great Resignation, people, that's why they're leaving. And they can start their own businesses much more easily, even though sometimes they might not. So that's where it's like, where can people go? So you're shifting a little bit more to support female entrepreneurs, I believe, right? Yes. As well. And so I love that, because without the individual focus first and understand and have that self-awareness. So do you think there might be a shift then for, many others leaving the workplace rather than going to another job to starting up their own businesses?
Absolutely. Employee in the company here, very hardworking. Sometimes I have to say, listen, just take a break. So she is that type of person. She's very big on responsibility and just getting the job done. And then again, during the pandemic, we had a conversation. She said, Keisha, wow, I've had a taste of freedom. Right? I now know what it is to work from home and just be able to go to my son's, game or whatever the case may be. Before, she was just used to working early in the morning, late at night, and that was her normal. That was her reality. And so, yeah, I believe, and she is just one example out of many women in particular who have already left and just making that decision to leave, and or those who are just waiting for that opportunity, waiting for that boost of confidence as well. That's a big part of it. to be able to get into their own business. And the Bahamas is small. So you mentioned our population, 400,000 give or take. And so I think what is happening now, and what I believe that I've been a champion of for a long time, is getting Bahamians particularly to be exposed to the world in a greater way, because the mindset, unfortunately, of some Bahamians, I don't know if it's the majority of what, but that we are so Bahamian centric, right? And so, we're so used to this small island mentality that we sometimes forget that there's a big world out there. And so that's a big part of the messaging that I have been communicating to women in the workplace and entrepreneurs, that, hey, don't focus on what's happening in the country. The opportunities are there. And once they're beginning to see that, they are feeling more confident to step out, move out of the corporate world, and try their own path. So absolutely, and I'm all for it. I am all for it.
And that's the thing that's amazing about technology as this enabler, because
Yeah.
it does allow for all this other possibility.
Mhm.
And I know some of the women's groups that I've been involved with, where there have been people from all over the world who
Mhm.
are in an incubator together, or
Yeah.
reinventing. And so even on this call, we have Monica, who's from the US, and I'm in Canada, and you're in Bahamas, and it does allow for that, and that this is again this global focus.
Yeah.
And also, you can still link whatever you do to your community through, giving back. And I love that, like charitable organizations. There's a woman I met who started a company called Black Mentorship Inc. here, which you'd love. We could talk about, my passion for mentoring.
Yeah.
And it's a nonprofit. And that's one of the groups that I give back to. And again, through action, right? And it's not meant to be boastful here. It's just an opportunity to have a community, something important in the community to give back, and then thinking about, okay, then how do we impact the world too?
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of women that are going to do this. The women, there's a lot of women who want to change again that status quo of what was normal, or the paradigm before, right? Like it's a different time, it's a different era. So I love having these conversations with people and women all over the world, and men too, who are making a difference. But I just feel like you're just starting. And I'm like so impressed with everything you've done. And you are now thinking about, where do I go beyond my country and my community, and how do I impact, women, and help them, be the best they can be. I just love it. I just love what you do. I did want to open it up to see if anybody else had any questions, because I could chat with you all day. You can put it in the chat, or if you want to hop out, that's fine too, because we have, a few 15 minutes or so left. But does anyone have a specific question that they'd like to ask Keshelle on some of what we've talked about today, or anything in general? I just think what you're doing is amazing, and how you've reinvented yourself too. It does give, optimism to people. So anybody have a question?
I think
Monica?
okay,
Oh,
go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. I really had a comment. Go ahead.
I think, just want to add, one of the, I guess, sources of the reinvention for me is just that core value of growth, right? My husband says I'm very extreme when I say you either growing or you're dying, but I truly believe that, if you're not growing, if you're not progressing, what are you doing? And so I guess that's a big source of what has just allowed me to consistently reinvent. And so I don't know how many persons value growth as much as I do, but that's a big part of why I'm always moving.
So good, so good. Yeah, I really love the image of you walking or trotting or slowly walking sometimes when you're asking those questions about what do you want now? And I think that is really a key question because it can shift. And how do you, when you talk to people, help them to release perhaps what was, particularly when it was successful or their identity is so encased with that? And
Yeah.
they're invested in that too, because not, they know that's success. They're not really sure what's ahead and how that's going to look.
Yeah, that's a powerful question. I will give you, I'll answer it this way. On Saturday, I did a dream board party. It was predominantly for couples, but there were very, very prominent women, prominent, powerful, successful women in the group. And in the dream, and I guess that's why I love the dream board party experience, because it forces people to look at what they want for their future, for their life. And then it causes them to face, like you just say, Monica, all right, this is what I want, this is what I have. Where is that gap? Where is that disconnect? And so there was a female in the group. She is a very, very successful, wealthy attorney. And she is at this transition, and that's her words, where, it's no longer fulfilling her. She is so used to the work of, the attorney life. But if she were to be honest, and unfortunately she was in the space where she was honest, she's like, I really don't want to do this for the rest of my life. I want to continue to have another child. I want to grow my family. I want to mentor. I want to teach. And she was at that conflict with, okay. And so on the break, I went directly to her, and I'm like, okay, what's going on? Talk to me. What's stopping you from going after the things that you said you want? And I shared my story. So a lot of the things that I do, I shared my story. I said, look, I said, I was there. I was also used to the corporate life, the salary, the perks. My husband and I were talking about the prestige of corporate and what that brought. But I also knew when I was no longer fulfilled. And I shared with her just my journey from making that really sharp decision to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to move away from that. And I like to say, follow my nudge, whatever the nudge is, because sometimes we don't know what it brings, but we do know. And I say, follow the nudge or follow the nagging. We do know what's nagging at us. We could choose to ignore it for a long time, but at some point, you can't run from it anymore. And so she and I were having just this conversation, and I'm like, look, at some point, I know where you at. And so for me, that's why I think I love doing dream board parties, because it forces people to look at their future and look at their current. And then I just love to ask the question, what's stopping you? What's going on? And I can push people off the edge very, very easily. I'm going to push you.
I love it. It's interesting. So there's a question in the chat, and because it came up for me when you were talking too about the fear. So how do you help people overcome their fear of going after their dreams with all the biasness all around? What advice would you give to women? What a great question.
Yeah. I don't think there is a particular system that I use. For me, I love just conversations. That's where it starts for me. I want to know, because people have fears for different reasons, right? And I'm mindful, because my husband always reminds me of that. Because in my mind, my logic is, if you want to do something, why don't you just do it? That's just how I think, right? I've come to appreciate that there are legitimate fears. that women have. And there's so many options, so many reasons. So for me, it's starting that conversation, being able to appreciate and understand and verbalize, hey, what are you fearing? Because sometimes that, fear false evidence appearing real. A lot of times that fear is so big in your head, in your mind, in your thoughts, that when you actually begin to verbalize it, you realize that it's not as big as you perhaps think it is. And then I am a natural strategist, right? I can come, you tell me a problem, my mind begins to, do its thing. And so you share with me what you want, what your fears are, and I'm gonna ask you, okay, what if you just do this first? Right? For example, again, on the weekend, they talked about one of the females, and they talked about, wanting to do this big mentorship and leave corporate and do the mentorship. And I'm like, well, why don't y'all just start one program instead of starting the big, going after that big grandiose vision at the beginning? Why don't you just start a program? And you could do that tomorrow. Let's sit down and come up with a plan to do that tomorrow and get that momentum going. And so that's typically what I love to do. Conversation, let's come up with a plan, and let's build the momentum. And generally, once people begin to see that they are moving towards that ideal, the fear starts to subside. Or I would say too, and my boardroom members, they know I'm famous for saying, close your eyes, press send. All right, just close your eyes and just do it. Do it, do it.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And this is the thing, is the fear is there a lot. And I've heard some people say, embrace it, like have a little chat, bring your fear and have them like sit beside you, give them a little hug and say, I know you're there, but it's going to be okay. I love it's so much of what you've been saying, because I think that when you have, sometimes you do have this calling and this, this vision, but it feels so big. And so taking it apart, and what I relate to so much what of you said too, because I was I practiced law before I went into human resources. And I just always didn't feel like I wasn't in this, like I wasn't fitting. And so, we were talking at the beginning all about equity, diversity, and inclusion. And a lot of this belonging has been happening, right? That's what it is. It's like trying to find, so that inkling or that nagging you talked about or something, it's like the nudge, because you just don't feel like you're in the right spot. And that's that sign, like, okay, so how do I have a discussion with that?
Yeah.
The fear, tell them, to back off a little, and then just really take that leap of faith. And Monica's on the call. And if you, I was in part of a group with her, and she was talking about, there was this fear, and then the other side, like we need the faith, right? So you'll have to check that out. But there's a few minutes left, so I don't know if anybody else has any other questions. I love it. Close your eyes and press send. Taking action, which you've obviously done a lot. We could all learn a lot from you. Is there, one other little piece of advice you'd give people that, as I know you are a big believer in mentorship, and that's a big passion here, as well as growth in our company as well. Like you have to keep growing constantly.
Yeah, I think that, if I were to sum up, my philosophy is, it's definitely find a mentor, find growth opportunities, place yourself in situations and circumstances that stretch you. And so I'm constantly being stretched, because I am constantly putting myself in circumstances and situations and environments that's going to stretch me. And so I'm usually fearful a lot of times, right? Because I'm like, God, all right, this is not comfortable. And I guess it's being comfortable with discomfort. And I think I've appreciated that's just how I've lived my life. There are times when I get pretty comfortable and I'm aware that, okay, Keshelle, you're too comfortable, but I don't usually stay there very long. I find ways to just, okay, what's the next thing that's going to create that nervous energy for me? I love that feeling of, okay, I'm afraid, I'm nervous, I'm excited. I love that. And so constantly putting yourself in, one of the things I like to say is when your comfort zone expands, your money zone expands. And so I am always expanding my comfort zone because I know that leads to bigger opportunities, bigger growth, financial gain, all of that stuff that comes with it as well. And so, yeah, being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Close your eyes and press in, feel the fear and do it anyway. Being comfortable with the fear of the unknown, and surrounding yourself with fabulous women. I love being around fabulous and fierce and powerhouse women. I just love it because that naturally pulls you up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that too. Oh my gosh. Well, I have a few good quotes I'm going to have to use for this woman making history right now. I just can't wait to see what's going to happen next and
I have some
continue.
announcements to be making very soon.
Well, hey, and before we go, I want to make sure for people watching now or later, where can people get a hold of you? And then that way they will be able to follow those announcements, or you can make a pre-announcement now if you like.
I am all over social media. So Keshelle Davis, you can go to my website that's being redone, but it has all of my links on my website. I am on most social media platforms. And so what's your favorite? You just choose one, send me a message. That's usually the easiest way to reach out to me. But yeah, there's certain opportunities that's evolving. One I can speak to now, the other I'll wait to make an announcement. I know I'm being considered for a host on our national radio show. This month I have been one of the many I think it's 5 fabulous women who were filling in for the previous host, and this is during prime time, 4 to 6 at drive time on national radio. So the month of February, I've been, filling in and co-hosting. It's been fun. It's a lot of work to be on radio. Oh, gee.
You think it wouldn't be? We don't have to do our hair and everything.
It's not just showing up and talking. It's a lot of work. I realize that, but I know at some point they perhaps will make a decision on who will be that permanent host. And that may be something that I'll be celebrating with you all. And then, like I said, there's certain other opportunities that's being finalized and coming down the pipeline, which really allows me to serve women at a much greater level, like you talked about, in a more global way.
Oh, I love that. I'm so excited for you. Oh, I can't wait. So first of all, second of all, last of all, I just wanted to say thanks again. I'm still like a little bit jet lagged probably from coming back yesterday, but I have just really enjoyed our chat today. What you're doing is just so fantastic. And I just think it says, what you said about growth, what you said about just pressing send and getting started. If anybody is watching this later, to just, listen to that, belief in yourself and listen to that little voice telling you you've got more to do and other things, and believe it. And I can't wait for those announcements, and keep in touch, which we will, I will. And for those on, we will send out the presentation. It will be on our website, but we'll send it out to those who signed up, as well as the recording is on the YouTube. And there's some great resources in there as well, like for people to really understand that, we still have work to do in our workplaces, in our communities, in the world. And I think that we all can make that difference. And I love seeing the change makers that showed up today,
Hopefully my
who
board
really,
members.
yes.
I love
And
it.
yeah, I really appreciate everyone taking the time out today. And Keshelle, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Hope to see you
Helen.
in Bahamas one of these
Of
days.
course.